When we talk about innate immunity, what does it mean to be innate? Well, when we talk innate, we think born with. Okay? Something that is giving you resistance from the start. When we look at innate immunity, this is some sort of defense that kicks in immediately as soon as you're infected with anything. And it doesn't matter what you're infected with. It doesn't matter if it's a pathogen or a virus or a bacteria or a rusty nail. All of these things are going to set out the same response as far as innate immunity is concerned. And that's because for us, as vertebrates, we rely heavily on innate immunity, but we also have something known as adaptive immunity that we'll talk about in a little while. This goes along the lines of our vaccines. For invertebrates, though, they only have innate immunity. That's it. They've got an exoskeleton that essentially protects them as much as possible from outside infections. They've got a very low pH. They're very acidic internally, and they use the lysozymes that we have seen before in your cells as a way to defend themselves against infection. So from this, they have basic immune cells that are capable of phagocytosis, so ingestion of particles, bacteria, and so on, but that's it. They've got nothing beyond that. So what we have to consider is, when is innate immunity good enough, and when is adaptive immunity going to be better for us? This is a fairly complex table, but I want to show you just very briefly where we're going with this discussion. So innate immunity, we need to focus on internal and external defenses. So external innate immunity, things like your skin. Just simply having a barrier to the outside world. Secretions, hairs, and so on. Internal, we're going to look at some very basic cell types that are going to help us defend against infection. Phagocytes, we've seen those before. Defensive proteins, inflammation, so fever, swelling. These are innate immunities. It doesn't matter what you're exposed to, you have the same response. Adaptive immunity, this is only found in vertebrates. This relies on things like antibodies. So this is where your vaccines are going to come into play. This is where previous infections. So this is essentially teaching your immune system what's bad. So this is learning in your immune system. So we'll see what that means. We tie this then into the lymphatic system, which we look at as basically a blood filter. Physical barriers, we've talked about your skin. You know that you've got a protective layer of epithelial on the outside, and basically helping you to resist pathogens externally. We also cover that skin in bacteria, good bacteria, to help defend us. We've got things that are secreting out of us. We don't even think about it. Oil glands are going to be full of immune type responses for us. Tears and saliva, full of immune type responses. Inside, we have epithelials again, in this case, lining organs and body cavities to protect your insides. We can have nonspecific defenses. So this is the idea that no matter what you're exposed to, you're going to have the same response. Fever, inflammation are the two big ones. If you have a cold, if you have a fever, if you get some sort of infection by stepping on something dirty outside, you're going to get a fever and you're going to get inflammation. They're all the same. The third line of defense that we have is the adaptive immunity that we'll talk about in a little while. This is very targeted to a specific pathogen. So this is going to be your flu vaccines. or your resistance to secondary infections. All of those things come into play. We do depend on your immune system having some sort of memory. So when I said about your immune system learning, we really are teaching it what is bad and what is good. Anything that is bad that enters your body, we call an antigen. The cells specific to nonspecific defense are phagocytes. So these are eaters, right? These are just going to ingest and engulf anything bad. But they come in two forms, micro and macro phages. Phage is eat, remember. So these are little eaters and big eaters. And when we look at these guys, we have to think about how they are going to behave in your system. We will see them all over the place. So things like neutrophils, very, very common. And they circulate in your blood. Macrophages, on the other hand, we look at being primarily associated with body tissues. So they're going to help clean up your tissues. Inflammation, as we mentioned, is going to be a response to pretty much any sort of infection or injury that you get. It's caused by mast cells. And what's actually happening is the mast cells secrete histamines. Where have you heard histamine before? Do any of you take an antihistamine? What do you take it for? Usually take it for stuffy nose. You take it for allergies sometimes. So what you're doing with an antihistamine is blocking histamines. When you block histamines, you're blocking inflammation. When we talk about building up mucus inside your nose and your eyes that turn into secretions and saliva and tears, all of these things in high concentrations with infection, we want to block those. We don't want you to have a stuffy nose because of a maple tree, okay? So we take antihistamines. Now, the whole idea with inflammation is it's going to slow the spread of anything bad. And the idea is by swelling, like this bottom hand here, very, very swollen, it's going to constrict or squeeze blood vessels. If you're constricting the blood vessels, you're keeping it from moving anything around your body. Very, very important. And with this swelling comes all kinds of cells that are going to help try to decrease any pathogens or antigens that have entered your body. The fever is because we are trying to increase the temperature of your body to kill any kind of antigen. Now, this works within reason. We can't have you with a prolonged, very high fever because remember, increased temp will affect proteins, enzymes, and so on that are going to denature. Remember that from macromolecules? So we have to keep in mind that the temp has to be regulated, it has to be under control. But a slight fever will actually help to kill off some of these antigens. When we look more at your specific defenses, so when we look at acquired immunity, we're going to start looking into more of the buildup of very specific types of white blood cells and immune responses. These cells, the natural killer cells and others, we actually look at being associated with some with both the innate immunity and then some with our more acquired immunity. So these natural killer cells really are kind of the brute force of your immune system. They will kill anything they're told to. And so these are the ones that are going to carry out apoptosis or programmed cell death that we talked about. And when we look at those cells, they're going to be responsible for a whole lot of what's going on in our body as far as decreasing the antigens that are coming in. B cells and T cells we're going to come back to later on. Interferons, these are essentially your neighborhood watch group. They're making sure that if you get any sort of infection that the body knows about it and that you're going to have some sort of response to it. And what I mean by that is they are watching, so if you fall and scrape your knee, oh, you have a boo-boo. What's going on? Well, immediately we're going to see platelets come in and try to stop the bleeding. We're going to have mast cells that are going to say, hey, something's going on, and are going to send signal to the bloodstream. So this is a chemical signal that informs the body that there's an injury. Neutrophils, we said, are the microphages. So those are our little eaters. They're going to come in and clean up the little things. Macrophages, remember, are our big eaters. And they'll come in and help clean up more things as well. But the nice thing about macrophages, as soon as they start ingesting things, they're going to send out something known as cytokines. And this is, again, a chemical response that is going to trigger your blood to send repair to that particular area. So our tissue repair, anything that needs to go on, is stimulated by that chemical response of the macrophages. Your lymphatic system, as we mentioned, really is responsible for helping you to filter out what's going on in your body. In particular, we're looking at filtering interstitial fluid. We're looking at filtering and cleaning up tissues and somewhat of your bloodstream, but primarily tissues and interstitial fluid. And as you see, it looks a lot like the map of your cardiovascular system. It goes everywhere. And it includes lymph vessels, lymph nodes, and the lymph itself, which is the fluid. So lymph vessels, these are going to collect fluid from tissues all over your body, and they're going to turn it into lymph, that fluid. And it sends it to the blood so that it can get filtered by lymph nodes and by the kidneys in some cases. And sometimes the liver, depending on what's going on. So when we look at your lymph organs, we often look at your lymph nodes. So if you've ever been sick and you went to the doctor and he felt kind of under your chin and sort of pushed on your neck, what he's looking for is swollen lymph nodes. You have lymph nodes in your neck, you have large lymph nodes in your armpits, and you have large lymph nodes in your groin area. So when you're sick, these swell because they're dealing with a lot of infection from around your body. We also look at your spleen as being very important in these defense mechanisms. Both of these are going to be absolutely full of white blood cells. So you're essentially bringing the infection to a site away from the tissues to be dealt with. So you notice here the cardiovascular with your red blood cells flows right along beside the lymph vessels. So the lymph in this case are green, and then the red blood cells. So looking at helping to pick up and filter out everything that's going on. So in the lymph organs, we're going to have macrophages. Macrophages, right? We're going to have some lymphocytes. So these are cells associated with the lymph system. And their response may say, hey, you know, This innate immunity, this basic response isn't good enough. We need something adaptive. So this is where we are dependent on increasing the response, heightening the response that's going on in your body.